Welcome to another 10 with Ken. I'm Ken Steele. Last week, the President and Vice Chancellor at the University of Regina, Vianne Timmons, sat down with me to talk about just why higher education institutions need to indigenize.
Indigenization of universities is not for Indigenous students. It's for all of our students.
Check out the episode if you missed it. We'll wait for you right here. This week we move on from the why to the how, summing up 100 ways to indigenize your campus.
So with the partnership with First Nations University on your campus, University of Regina is in an enviable position, really, to understand some of these challenges and the road ahead for indigenization. What advice could you offer to your counterparts at other universities?
Indigenous people have had very different life experiences. They're not all the same. The big thing is to, first of all, recognize that. There's no clear path on this road. You need to work with Indigenous, both knowledge keepers, Indigenous elders, faculty and staff and students to indigenize your campus. It has to be done with them.
One mantra I've often heard about indigenization is nothing about us without us. But the challenge is that there are not nearly enough First Nation, Métis, or Inuit peoples involved in higher ed yet.
Just look at the number of Indigenous faculty members we have. We need to increase that and find ways to support Indigenous youth and Indigenous adults in getting their PhDs. Same with staffing. We also need to increase the numbers for students to attend university. When you go to Northern Canada, I go to the North every year on a Northern tour, and I talk to the students there. The challenges they face are immense. Like they'll say to me, how can I get to University of Regina? Because some of them are fly-in communities. To, is there childcare there because I have 2 children? To, what happens if there's a funeral in my community, I have to go home? How will I be able to do that? And on and on and on. The challenges are immense, and we have to break down those barriers.
Providing transportation and financial aid to Indigenous students, supporting more of them through graduate school and into tenured faculty positions. These are big, tough problems that could take decades to resolve. Are there things that colleges and universities could do right now to advance indigenization?
We have at the University of Regina put together 100 ways to indigenize the campus. There are so many things that cumulatively can change the face and nature of the experience for an Indigenous student.
When she was still the executive lead for indigenization at U of R, Dr. Shawneen Pete drafted the list as a conversation starter for deans and faculty members. See the show notes for a link to the full 100 Ways checklist. Among the 100 ways, we can recruit more Indigenous students and form Indigenous cohorts to support them. We can also seek out sessional hires with experience indigenizing teaching. A good first step is to recognize, acknowledge, and incorporate Indigenous names and symbols on campus.
Whenever we have an event, no matter if it's Senate or Board of Governors meetings, we acknowledge that we are on Treaty 4 lands. It seems very simple, some of the things, but they're important, like hanging Treaty 4 flag, like displaying the Eagle staff, like hanging a star blanket, like having Indigenous art throughout the campus. So not only do our Indigenous students see themselves on the campus, when they walk the halls, they walk with pride because they know that they are contributing so much to our campus.
Among the 100 ways, we can honor Indigenous alumni, nominate Indigenous scholars for awards, and follow traditional protocols by recognizing elders with gifts and honoraria. And of course, revise criteria for faculty performance measures and promotion, perhaps by finding a way to recognize relational capital. Indigenization also means incorporating traditional celebrations and events on campus.
First Nations University has a huge powwow, and if you've never been to a powwow, you should go. It's magnificent. The regalia's beautiful, but the skill, the dancing, the competitions, they're really enlightening and important, I think, for all Canadians to watch. First Nations students do a lot of feasts on campus. We do smudging, but our non-Indigenous students are learning. If you see a round dance, you'll see both Indigenous and non-Indigenous students. If you see a feast, you'll see everyone there together, celebrating, learning.
Every department could consider celebrations or welcoming events for Indigenous students. And of course, we start literally transforming the campus by creating Indigenous spaces.
And there needs to be a gathering place for students that is theirs, that has supports, a place that they can go and sit around and talk about the challenges they face when they walk the halls of a predominantly white campus in many communities.
We can develop campus signage and promotional materials that reflect Indigenous peoples' languages and contributions. At U of R, the Aboriginal Student Centre is a hub to access specialized student services.
We also want to ensure we have the proper supports for students. So we have an Aboriginal Student Centre. Our success rates and retention rates are increasing every year, but we provide tremendous programs of support to the students so that can happen. You must invest financially in supports for Indigenous students.
We can create courses designed specifically for Indigenous learners and mandatory courses for all students to avoid creating academic ghettos.
Truth and Reconciliation certainly had recommendations specific to professional schools, to inserting some mandatory courses, to adding First Nations language courses.
We've done that, and faculties have done it voluntarily here at our university. So for example, if you want to graduate with a degree in arts, you must have a course that honors Indigenous either language, history, or culture. Same with nursing, social work, education, all the professional programs. We have elders and knowledge keepers that go into classrooms. We also are looking at ways of supporting and preserving Indigenous language. For example, we have a Dene, immersion teacher education program that we're doing up north.
Perhaps the biggest challenge for us settlers is to check our privilege, to recognize our bias. Most of us have been raised in a Eurocentric culture, and we take capitalism and the scientific method for granted. We have to recognize that whiteness isn't neutral. Among the 100 ways, we can start naming the dominant worldview and making visible alternative perspectives. Which sounds a lot like what education is supposed to do, right?
One of the other areas that's important, I think, is to provide supports for faculty and staff who want to indigenize their curriculum. Whether it's attending workshops, putting on workshops, or working with someone who is Indigenous, having them go to another campus and meet up with a faculty member who has done some of this work. But that support should be given.
We can provide release time. Bring in Indigenous perspectives through teleconference, co-teaching, or field trips. Involve Indigenous elders, alumni, and community members in advisory circles within each faculty. Or establish an Indigenization fund for course revision. We can move away from lecture and try a circle format for our classrooms, or land-based learning. Maybe we can even introduce arts or performance-based methods to evaluate student learning. But Indigenization can't just be the job of those few Indigenous students, staff, and faculty on our campuses.
You have to empower your faculty and staff who are Indigenous to be able to help lead, but not have to be the leader. Many of our Indigenous faculty carry the world on their shoulders. They're expected to be doing so much. So if it requires extra supports in terms of finances or course release to help them be able to be successful, that's really important to look at also.
We should ensure we're not burdening Indigenous students by expecting them to fill in curricular gaps. And even if we're not Indigenous ourselves, we need to learn.
We're academics. We know how to learn. This is something everyone on the campus has to. All faculty are leaders, all staff are leaders. This is something they need to assume. We can read up on history. The history of First Nations people is for the first time being written. There are many conferences now. There is so much opportunity.
We can make a point of seeking out Indigenous scholarship in our field and can attend campus workshops on supporting and teaching Indigenous students or indigenizing the curriculum. The checklist recommends numerous sources. Check out the show notes for a bibliography.
I think any leader on campus has a responsibility to read, to learn, and to work through the many issues that he, she, or they will face as they go on this journey.
So, indigenizing the academy is not just the job of Indigenous people. In fact, it won't have succeeded until everyone understands it and promotes it. So that's why this white settler has tried to tackle the issue in his own way, in this webcast. No doubt others have done better or will do better, but I encourage you to explore your own possibilities. Those of us in the Northern Hemisphere know all too well that winter is coming. So coming up next time is the annual 10 with Ken holiday special. We'll be back in the new year with more campus visits and interviews and episodes exploring the impact of artificial intelligence on higher ed administration, teaching, and student services. To be sure you don't miss them, take a moment now to subscribe. And as always, thanks for watching. Among the 100 ways, I already forgot. Among the 100 ways we can honor Indigenous alumni. Recognize, no, nominate. We can honor Indigenous alumni. Nominate. Among the 100 ways we can honor Indigenous alumni. I just keep trying. See the show notes for a link. Oh, that's quite a shadow, isn't it? No, probably don't want to do that. Gotta get my parka. Winter is coming.